Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're exploring a deeply fascinating, highly structured philosophical framework about human existence, created by Xu Fang. In this explainer, we're going to impartially unpack a core text titled Standards of Perfect Human Nature. We'll be looking strictly at how the source material defines our ultimate potential, the historical roadblocks we've faced along the way, and the honestly surprising boundaries it places on human compassion. It's quite a structured journey, so let's map out these complex ideas together. Okay, let's dive right into this. The source text poses a massive, overarching question. Can human nature actually be perfected? And according to the author's framework, the answer isn't just yes, but that it's an absolute necessity. The core premise here is that achieving this perfect human nature is the strict requirement for two very distinct things. First, an individual's personal journey to a supreme life space. And second, on a macro level, the establishment of global peace and justice. Let's look at exactly how the text defines this. So that brings us to Section 1, Defining Perfect Human Nature and the Prerequisites for Peace. The formal definition laid out in the source material is pretty uncompromising. Perfect human nature is described as the absolute prerequisite to establish a human value system based on justice, peace, and happiness. The text paints a very stark contrast for us here. Without this perfection, well, the individual just cannot obtain happiness and literally has no bright future. And it goes further. Without it, humanity as a whole is doomed. The text explicitly states that mankind will never be able to avoid a perpetual state of ups and downs filled with endless competition, confrontation, and war. Now, to avoid that grim fate, the author lays out 8 specific criteria. And what's really interesting about this list is how these conditions blend the spiritual, the internal, and the practical. You see conditions like revering nature, being modest and trustworthy, staying totally calm in both good and bad times, and completely dropping the mindset of winning and losing. But the text focuses most heavily on condition number 5, be sympathetic and compassionate. This specific condition is presented as the primary vehicle to elevate humanity out of its darkest tendencies. And to understand why that elevation is so desperately needed, the text asks us to look backward. Which brings us to Section 2, A History of Human Misery, and the grim reality of our past. The source material shifts into a really somber, urgent tone when reviewing human history. It describes it as a sad and stirring image. Tracing this grim reality through time, the text points to massive, devastating markers of human struggle. We're talking everything from the era of Noah's flood to the Black Plague in modern Europe, all the way to the Second World War. But beyond those grand historical events, the text emphasizes the open and secret struggles happening right under the surface, the constant, brutal wars between tribes, races, religions, and political parties. This constant conflict leads the author to pose these incredibly powerful rhetorical questions directly to the reader. Where is the wisdom of human? Where is the way out? Was the brutal struggle the optimum power to drive human history forward? The source uses these questions to highlight humanity's collective grief. The argument is that witnessing these endless interest disputes and brutal struggles actually makes us entirely lose our confidence in life. It forces us to feel sympathetic on a massive global scale. But the text doesn't just keep things at a bird's eye view. It zooms right in on the individual. It's a stark reminder that suffering spares absolutely no one, regardless of their status. The temporary happiness of poets, artists, and musicians cannot conceal their long-time mental suffering. The momentous glory of heroes, emperors, and millionaires cannot block their hesitation. Even the power and prestige of presidents doesn't give them a more peaceful mind than everyday civilians. The text argues that wealth and success are just illusions that cannot erase inward anxiety. After thousands of years, man still cannot find a good way of living. So, what exactly is the way out of all this universal anxiety and historical brutality? That brings us to Section 3, the power of compassion, or what the text calls the supreme level. The philosophical solution brings us right back to that 5th condition we mentioned earlier, but the author makes a really crucial distinction here. Compassion is defined as showing sympathy toward the macro-level fate of human misery, that grand historical tragedy we just discussed. Sympathy, on the other hand, is defined as taking pity on the micro-level tragic results of the individual, the inward anxiety of the millionaire or the everyday civilian. And the author literally elevates these combined traits above absolutely everything else. The text states, "Be sympathetic and compassionate. Love is the supreme level of human nature. It is the definite bridge and path to the Buddha." According to the source, without sympathy and compassion, we are frankly no different than plants or wild beasts. It's exactly these qualities that sublimate our personality, making us clever, intelligent, and reasonable. It's the definitive bridge to spiritual elevation. But hold on, because just as we reach this peak of philosophical idealism, we hit section 4, when pity becomes dangerous, the nuance and caveats. The text abruptly shifts gears here into a highly pragmatic, almost warning tone. It introduces strict boundaries regarding when you should actually withhold your pity and help. This is fascinating because it totally counters the idea of limitless blind altruism. The source warns that for people who are strongly self-respected, showing them sympathy is actually regarded as a humiliation. Because of this, the text instructs that we cannot easily show mercy in expression or action. The rules laid out are clear. If someone is hungry, or if they suddenly come to harm, but they do not actively appeal to you for help, you should not go to help them. Unsolicited help in this framework violates the boundaries of the prideful. And the warnings go even further when dealing with what the text calls unreasonable people. The source details that there are individuals with undistinguished love and hate, people who are capricious and prone to biting the very hand that feeds them. The text explicitly warns the reader that if you sympathize with this type of person and show them mercy, they will bring you absolutely endless troubles. And this brilliantly illustrates the point. The text pulls in the classic fable of the farmer and the snake. In the story, the farmer shows pure sympathy and pity for a freezing, poisonous snake. But the fundamental nature of the snake doesn't change, and the farmer is ultimately bitten to death. The source uses this to underscore the fatal consequences of misplaced mercy. Being compassionate does not mean being naive to the dangers of unreasonable actors. To really cement this concept, the author provides one final highly relatable example: marriage. The text warns that if you enter a marriage not because you genuinely love and are fond of each other, but simply out of sympathy and pity for the other person, the results will be disastrous. When the days pass, the text claims you will completely strip away your own real happiness. Ultimately, through this misplaced mercy, you yourself will become the tragic object of sympathy and compassion. Which leaves us with a final, really profound question. Where do we draw the line between compassion and self-preservation? Feng's framework tells us that perfect human nature absolutely requires a supreme level of sympathy and love to elevate humanity out of its history of brutal misery. Yet it simultaneously demands a ruthless pragmatism to protect ourselves from the proud, the capricious, and the toxic. It's a delicate, fascinating philosophical balance. Take a moment to reflect on how that balance plays out in your own life. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and as always, keep questioning and keep learning.